A very good afternoon, Ram Ram and Johar to everyone present here. I thank the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to moderate the session with very learned friends and colleagues from the academia. Now, I've been given the task to set the context for today's discussion, and the title that you can see says Reclaiming Histories, Tribal Leaders and Movements in India's Freedom Struggle. And therefore, I would like to draw your attention to two keywords here, that is reclaiming histories, right? And this particular theme that has been set for today's discussion actually provides us a very important platform to engage in the decolonization of historical narratives, right? And the narratives around India's freedom struggle for very long has been filtered from a colonial and then eventually from a post-colonial perspective that has emphasized certain dominant works, frameworks, which have often neglected the nuanced and vital contributions of the tribal communities of India in the freedom movement. Now, this discussion, therefore, that we're about to start off does not only address the historical omissions, but it also invites all of us together to reconsider the methodologies and epistemologies through which we understand history. And I would also take the leverage, not only history, but any other aspects of social sciences, whether it is sociology or anthropology, the lenses that we use to understand the tribal communities or the Janjati communities of India. Now, the need to decolonize historical narratives is widely being argued by scholars in India and across the globe. To quote Nungvi Wa Thuing, who has written a book called Colonized the Mind, says that the kind of narratives that have been created actually is from a reductive view of the tribal communities. And therefore, there is an idea that has been attached to it that says backward, peripheral, and so on and so forth. And this colonized perspective, therefore, is the challenge that we stand in front of. Now, this framing that tribal knowledge system, practices, and worldviews are secondary or outdated is again a problematic proposition. Therefore, decolonizing history involves both challenging these reductive frameworks and recentering the Janjati or the tribal voices more so in the Indian context, in the larger academic discourse, and since we're talking about history, so in the historical discourse. Now, there's another book called Decolonizing Methodologies, which was written by Linda Smith, right? Where she talks that reclaiming indigenous history is not just about inclusion, right? It is fundamentally about shifting the paradigms, shifting the lenses, shifting the approaches through which so far any kind of academic discourses have been carried out. And here we're talking about removing the colonial lenses. So when I'm talking about this reclamation of history and academia, in the Indian context, I would like to put forth three lenses, or one can say three principles, right? That is Asmita, Astitva, and Vikas. To put it in translation, identity, existence, and development. And all these three put together can give us an approach or a lens to understand or to even get a glimpse of the tribal communities in India and therefore outside as well, and to approach all of it from a fresh, decolonized perspective. So, through this platform today, right, when we're talking about reclaiming histories, these lenses become critical. And how do they become critical? So, when I'm saying Asmita or identity, say, for example, we will take the reference of Bhagwan Birsa Munda, right? Because he's a more, let's say, a known name when we're talking about tribal leaders. So if you take that context, we are not just thinking of him, or we're just not remembering him because he fought or he, created a revolution. But that is not what that was done. When we're talking about Birsa Munda or any other tribal leaders, we are also talking about each of their action being correlated to what we call Asmita. That is their identity. right? Something that has been completely removed from the academic narratives or whatever discourses that we have had so far. The next thing, when we're talking about astitva or existence, it's a powerful reminder, right, of the presence and of the resilience of the Janjati community, who has been completely, if I can take the liberty to say, whitewashed out of the academic narratives. Okay, the moment we think of, let's say, the freedom movement or the freedom struggle, if if I ask you to name a few leaders other than Birsa Munda, because I've just named him, can you think of any tribal leaders right at the back of your mind? Okay. Okay. Others? But will I take exception as an example? Out of the so many of us today, I have had only two voices. An exception is not an example. So the example is all of us put together could not name even 5 or 6 people who are freedom fighters from the tribal community. So that's what I'm talking about, astitva, existence. So when we're talking about these movements, when we're talking about the kind of fight that has been put forward in the context of the Indian freedom struggle, we are also going to look at it from the perspective of asmita, existence, right? And something the colonial discourse will never tell you. Okay? And then, of course, we are coming to the perspective of vikas, development. Now, we are not talking about development only from the economic perspective, right? We are trying to talk about development from a holistic perspective that takes into consideration indigenous knowledge systems, their cultural values, ethos, which have been exceptionally remarkable in what we call sustainable development, which has laid foundations for sustainable development and the overall development, right? So when we're talking about vikas, we're talking from that perspective and not just an economic perspective. And again, vikas is not an individual entity. If you're not thinking about asmita and if you're not thinking about astitva, together, then we can lead on to vikas. As an individual entity, vikas will not stand its ground, right? So therefore, this whole idea or the key word here today, that is reclaiming history, becomes very, very critical for all of us to engage, because even today, sadly, we are guided by the colonial perspectives and narratives that have set the academic tone or the academic discourse. Right? So that is the perspective, and that is my submission to both Professor Roktim and Professor Vivekanand, that can we take this discourse and deliberations, right, from these 3 points of views, wherein we are not only talking about the contributions of our tribal leaders, whether from Northeast or whether from Central India, but what is the relevance of talking about these movements or these leaders in the current context, what value it holds, and how are we, sort of trying to reclaim or reposition or shed the colonial perspective. So I think these are the propositions I place in front of the both of you, and we can take the discussion forward. Before we start the discussion, I would like to inform the House that we will have a question answer session at the end of once both our speakers have completed their deliberation. So whatever questions and queries you may have, please note them down, and we will try our best to answer the questions that you may have. Thank you for your attention, and I would request Professor Roktim to start over with his deliberation. So around 5 to 6 minutes should be okay for start.
We'll go there or...
As you're comfortable. I'll also join you here, whatever is comfortable. Yeah, so 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll move on. Yeah. I think there is a mic here.
Thank you, Yashi, and the organizing committee for inviting me here. This is a very important chapter as far as the history of tribal in the Indian freedom struggle is concerned. Perhaps when I heard this committee, Bhagwan Birsa Munda sir was constituted only in August last 2 months ago, and this is, I think is the biggest achievement of the cell. Uh, what I'm saying, I'm just trying to claim that it is a historic event because so far, whatever academic books that we are studying or that are in the public domain, as Dr. Datta said, these are from the colonial perspective. The famous, whatever books related to Northeast India, especially the colonial period, H.K. Pujari and many others, these actually reinforces the colonial ideology that sees these freedom fighters as oppressors, as raiders, as savages or headhunters. So these they are repeating the same thing in the post-colonial era. So there is a therefore a huge necessity to rework on the history of freedom struggle and the contribution of tribes of Northeast India, or for that matter, Central India, or any parts of India, in the broader context of Indian freedom struggle. Now we are celebrating this, according to our Prime Minister and everyone in India, that a journey from a journey to 2047, Amrit Kal.
Yes.
So it is actually, I think, a period where we can reclaim, as it is mentioned, the histories of tribal leaders and their communities. So my initial remark would be that it should not be confined to this lecture series itself, and there should be some academicians and other interested groups that comes up and take up this issue. Most of the things which I may speak later on maybe is obviously interesting, but most of you may not have heard this or never have, read about. If I say that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, when he says Delhi Chalo, we know the slogan Delhi Chalo, but where from Delhi? From he was supposed to go to Delhi. We never try to inquire. But when I worked on this mega project, in fact, it's still going on, we found that he was, what he was saying is that he wanted to come from Burma, Myanmar, from Samrat track, to Imphal, to Kohima, to Dimapur, and from Dimapur, from the Brahmaputra Valley to West Bengal to Delhi. That was his route. But we never tried to know. And during his endeavor, he came up to Kohima. I met several people, more than 11 people, who spoke about Netaji, who worked with them, with the INA and Netaji. I went to the house where these villagers in eastern Nagaland, Ruzazo village, they are still preserving the house like a temple. The house where Netaji slept for 7-8 days. They celebrated the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose birthday, Netaji birthday. Mega, with a mega event. I have never seen in Brahmaputra Valley, Assam, or in other parts of India. They spend their own money to celebrate that event. So the respect, the emotion that is attached with Netaji is enormous among the different tribes of Nagahins, mainly the Angamis, the Chakasans, and the Imili must be knowing. So many these people, they had emotion. So their contribution, they provided food, shelter. They lost everything by serving the INA and the Japanese soldiers who almost won the war. The popularly called the Tennis Court War, which is the most dreaded war during the Second World War, voted by the Commonwealth War Mission. So the contributions of the Angamis, the other tribes. When I speak about the Arunachal, various tribes of Arunachal Pradesh, forget about learning about their struggle against the British. we hardly know about the tribes names. When I say Adis, the Nishis, the Khamtis, the Mishimis, they fought for decades against the colonial forces. From 1830s to 1890s, the Lushais, the Mizos, initial encounter took place in 1840s, and finally they could establish the district headquarters in Aizol or in Lunglei only in 1890s. So decades of struggle. But in academic books, these are mentioned as merely as revolts or uprisings or some kind of raids. The Naga Hills, as we know today, with a different perspective, we know mostly about Naga Hills, because of insurgency or norms. But you see, when I say about the struggle, freedom struggle, their contributions, the British wanted to occupy Naga Hills since 1830s. But finally, they could achieve only in 1884, when the final, the headquarters was established, district headquarters at Kohima. The first church came up in 1885. First convert among the Angamis took place in 1885. So these are the unknown histories that I think we should know. And this is my opening remark, obviously, and I'll obviously throw more light on these issues.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible? I think it's not working. Okay. Hello. Am I audible now? Yeah. First of all, I must extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizing team and Professor Vivek sir, Professor Vijay sir, ma'am, and Professor Naik sir, and every one of you. You did such a wonderful job to come here in such a huge gathering. As I understand, most of you are from IIT and you are the students of technology and engineering, and still you have shown that interest to the topic which actually primarily deals with social sciences, and therefore I'm thankful to you. I express my gratitude for you having come here and being the part of this program. Another important thing is Dr. Datta has put a wonderful introductory note, and Raktim sir also has put a wonderful introductory comments on the issue area. As Dr. Datta has put, reclaiming history of the tribal communities and remembering their contributions in India's freedom struggle. Why is that important? Because we have already completed 75 years of our independence, and we have been talking about inclusive growth and that the communities which have remained excluded, that if they are to be made the part of the national project, then I think everybody has to be brought in. That one aspect is there when we talk about reclaiming history. But when we talk about the tribal communities, what is that comes in our mind? If I am not from a tribal area, since me and Raktim sir and Priyashi ma'am also has remained, and most of us have remained connected with the tribal issues, and therefore we haven't tried to understand the tribal communities through books. We are trying to understand those tribal communities by being one amongst them or by mingling with them and interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, understanding them as they are. But in our most of the books, the colonial discourses, and also uh, in movies primarily, the popular media, what is projected about tribal communities is that they are the headhunters or some wild people or beastly people clad with some sort of leaves, all the time dancing around the fire. These are the images which have been projected in our minds. That's how we understand. How many of us do not understand Hindi at all? Any one of us? I'll try to make it bilingual. That would be better for me also to interact and you also to understand. All right. So, ये जिंगा लाला हूँ एक जो गाने हो जिंगालाला हो वगैरह और इस प्रकार के जो गाने दिखाए जाते हैं, और हमें लगता है कि ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज ऐसी ही होती है, और we never try to make an effort to go and understand as they are. So there is a very big problem when we deal with tribal communities, and that problem is image versus reality. The image which has been projected, जिस image जो image हमारे सामने बताई गई है और जो रियलिटी है, वो बहुत बड़ा डिफरेंस है. इसलिए हम रिक्लेमिंग हिस्ट्री की जब बात करते हैं, तो आप देखें कि हमें जालियनवाला बाग हत्याकांड के बारे में या फिर वो मसाकर के बारे में हमको पता है, वी नो अबाउट दैट. बट उससे भी बड़ा मसाकर जो है मानगढ़ पहाड़ी पर हुआ है, जो भीलों के साथ किया गया था. जो गोविंद गुरु जो भीलों के जो नेता थे, वो धर्मगुरु थे, उनके नेतृत्व में वो जो लड़ाई वहां पर लड़ाई तो नहीं थी, वो एक प्रदर्शन था कि ना मानो रे ना मानो, भोरेटिया सरकार ना मानो, भोरेटिया ना मानो. मतलब भोरेटिया मतलब जो गोरे लोग हैं उनका हम नहीं मानेंगे, उनका कहा हुआ नहीं मानेंगे, उनके नियमों को नहीं मानेंगे. उन्होंने जो समाज में एक डिसरप्शंस लाए हैं, उन डिसरप्शंस को नहीं मानेंगे. एक इस प्रकार का जो प्रदर्शन था, वो पहाड़ी पे जा रहे थे और उन पर 4 लाख फायर्स उनके पास थे. ब्रिटिश अधिकारियों के पास 2 लाख फायर्स चलाए गए, कई लोगों को मारा गया. उनमें से एक जो महिला थी, एक ब्रिटिश अधिकारी ने अपने मेमोइर्स में लिखा है कि when we were firing, I could see that the mother was died and baby was drinking her milk. और वो देख करके I felt so inhuman about what we were doing, and then I ordered not to fire. So that is a situation. वो हुआ. या फिर 1900 में जो डुमरी पहाड़ी पर जो लड़ाई हुई ब्रिटिशों के बीच में और भगवान बिरसा मुंडा और उनके साथियों के बीच में, मुंडाओं के बीच में, these were bigger massacres than the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. But Jallianwala Bagh massacre के बारे में हम जानते हैं, लेकिन हम इन 2 massacres जो उसके पहले बहुत पहले हुए हैं, उन massacres के बारे में नहीं जानते हैं. और that their contribution is equally important or more important, should I say, in India's struggle for independence. तो इन चीजों को जानने के लिए जो है, हमें एक हिस्ट्री को रिक्लेम करने की आवश्यकता है, इन चीजों को समझने की आवश्यकता है. दैट वन एस्पेक्ट दैट वी हैव टू कीप इन माइंड. अनदर थिंग आई थिंक कि ये जो ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज की जो लड़ाइयां थी, हमको जो बताया गया है, हमें यह बताया गया है कि दिस वर ओनली फॉर द लैंड, जल जंगल जमीन की लड़ाई थी, उससे आगे कुछ लड़ाई नहीं थी, ऐसा हमें बताया गया है. बट दैट वाज नॉट फॉर जस्ट जल जंगल और जमीन, दैट वाज फॉर अ ब्रॉडर नेशनहुड. और वो जो हमारी नेशनहुड की परिकल्पना के बारे में हम जब चर्चा करते हैं, then generally we trace that history to 1648, when after 30 years of war, the European powers came together, they signed a treaty called Treaty of Westphalia. उसके बाद में मॉडर्न नेशन स्टेट की आइडियाज आई, द आइडिया ऑफ सॉवरेनिटी, संप्रभुता की सारी परिकल्पनाओं की बात होती है. बट और उसके आधार पर they divided themselves into the nations, the states, and then states became nation, और वो nation state कहने लगे. We had many states, but we were one nation all the time for a very long time, since immemorial. सनातन राष्ट्र है, हम इसलिए कहते हैं. उसके बारे में डॉक्टर दत्ता ने कहा ही है उनके इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क में. इस बारे में आई वाज लिसनिंग टू प्रोफेसर पटनायक. He is well known, world renowned anthropologist, and also he heads the tribal studies chair in Delhi University. Generally क्या होता है कि we try to understand our realities through the prism of the Western narratives or Western discourses. We haven't invented our own discourses to understand our own realities. वो रिक्लेम हिस्ट्री की जब बात कर रहे हैं, और उनका इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क और रক্তিम सर ने भी जो कहा, we will have to devise our own instruments, our own discourses, our own narratives to understand our own realities. Then only we will understand the difference between the atrocities which were perpetrated or which were suffered by the indigenous communities in North America, South America, Australia, and other parts of the world, and the tribal groups, या जनजाति जिसे कहते हैं, और कुछ लोग आदिवासी जिसे हमें कहते हैं. इसमें जो डिफरेंस है वो हमें समझ सकता है. हमारे यहाँ पर कोई बाहर से नहीं आया। इसलिए हम कहते हैं कि कौन आदि है सब अनादि है, हम सब भारतवासी है, पुरखे सबके खून एक है, नगर ग्राम वनवासी है। हम सभी लोग एक ही है। और ये जो आर्य आक्रमण का सिद्धांत वगैरह का इस प्रकार का जो झूठा पुलिंदा हमें जो परोसा गया बहुत लंबे समय तक, पहले तो आक्रमण कहा, उसके बाद में वो कहने लगे कि माइग्रेशन, आर्यन माइग्रेशन। But this Aryan invasion theory or Aryan migration theory has been debunked on many quarters by various scholars, archaeologists. बहुत सारे excavation से वो establish हुआ है, but still that argument is not being accepted. The argument is only being pushed forward, which is colonial powers के अपने आप को sustain करने के लिए जो आवश्यक था, वो narratives हमारे यहाँ पर रहे। ये recent history है, when the industrial revolution and then colonizing जो enlightenment, industrial revolution और colonizing spree शुरू हुई, the European powers went and conquered North America, South America, Australia, and they massacred the local indigenous communities और बच्चों को अडॉप्ट वगैरह करके उनकी भाषाओं को, उनकी लैंग्वेजेस को, उनकी सारी कल्चर्स को खत्म कर दिया। That kind of experience we do not have here. If that has happened to an extent by the Mughals, the Islamic rulers, when they came in, primarily by the British, because British were on the civilizing mission. वो क्या कहते थे? White man's burden. Anybody who doesn't look like white man, who like us, we are brown colored, और उनके लिए तो काले ही थे हम, black people. They were uncivilized, and therefore they have to be civilized, because they had understood what civilization is all about, and so they wanted to civilize everybody. अब Rudyard Kipling के बारे में आपने सुना होगा, famous poet, but he is one of the pioneers who who upholds this idea of white man's burden and civilizing the Philippines people. जो if you can keep your head, उनकी जो कविता है, he's great poet, no doubt about that, but he's one of the pioneers of this idea of civilizing the uncivilized people. Anybody who is not white is uncivilized, and therefore he has to be civilized, and therefore he has to be brought into the faith that the white men follow. ये सारी प्रक्रियाओं की वजह से हुआ यूं है कि we have totally lost confidence in ourselves, in our civilizational values, and therefore हमारे भारत के इतिहास को अगर हमें समझना है, हमारी ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज को अगर हम समझना है हमें, so when these Western colonizers went to Australia, North America, South America, in various parts of the world, in Africa also, they tried to understand those indigenous communities through evolutionary perspective. उसमें evolutionary perspective में evolution के स्तर पे, economic progress के स्तर पे, आज जो economic development के indicators हम जिनको मानते हैं, उनके स्तर पे ये लोग नीचे ठहरते थे, क्योंकि white man के जैसे वो उनका उतना स्टैंडर्ड नहीं था। इसीलिए उन्होंने कहा कि ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज अलग होती है। इस प्रकार से भारत में इट्स नॉट एवोल्यूशनरी पर्सपेक्टिव, इट्स हिस्टोरिकल पर्सपेक्टिव। एंड व्हाट इज द हिस्टोरिकल पर्सपेक्टिव? आज भी आप अगर इदू मिश्मी नाम की जो कम्युनिटी है, सर अरुणाचल प्रदेश का सर ने जिक्र किया, अरुणाचल प्रदेश में वो कम्युनिटी क्या मानती है कि भगवान श्री कृष्ण की पत्नी रुक्मिणी वो इदू इश्मी कम्युनिटी से है, मिश्मी, इदू मिश्मी कम्युनिटी से। So Rukmini is from that community, a tribal which we regard today as a tribal community. She marries भगवान श्री कृष्ण उस समय, और वो कहते हैं कि हमारी बहन को भगा के ले गया, इसलिए उसके साथ हमारा युद्ध हुआ, लेकिन युद्ध में भगवान श्री कृष्ण ने हमको हराया, इसलिए वो अभी भी वो बाल थोड़ा काटे रहते, वो जो साधना कट वगैरह जो होता है ना पहले वाली, उस प्रकार से। नाग कन्या उलूपी जो है उसके साथ अर्जुन का विवाह हुआ है, और माँ हिडिंबा जो माता हिडिंबा है, शी इज अ दिमासा प्रिंस, आई सपोज दिमासा प्रिंस, दिमासा है दिमासा कम्युनिटी की, और उनका मंदिर कहाँ है? हिमाचल में है। एंड देन अनदर थिंग, ये जो साउथ एंड नॉर्थ वाला जो डिवाइड हुआ है, ये बताया गया है, इफ देयर वाज अ डिवाइड, व्हाई आदि शंकराचार्य इन 6th and 7th century travels all the way from Tamil Nadu and goes to Srinagar and establishes 4 mathas, east, west, north and east, north and south? If there was not oneness, then why should he travel such a long distance at the cost of his own health and life? He died very early. So the sense of oneness, we were always one nation. States were different. There was different states, but we were one nation. There was one feeling that we are bound together by certain common culture. So we try to reclaim our history, we will have to see ourselves through our own prism, in our own ways, in our own discourses, in our own narratives, which we will have to evolve and understand our communities in our own ways. Then only I think we would do justice to the communities which have remained neglected, which have not found enough space in our NCRT books, in our university books, in our post-graduation books, and research has never taken place with this perspective. Because I was listening to Vaibhav Surangeji, one of the activists who has spent entire life working for the tribal communities. He says, he interacts with one of the professors of Delhi University, and she has already written 12 books. And she wants to write one more book on Northeastern tribes. And she says, how would she write? I will sit in the library, I will read another books, and then I will write the book. She hasn't understood the community itself. She's trying to understand the community through the eyes of somebody. And that has happened. And that has happened for various reasons. In the course of discussion, I think we would touch on that also. I'm sorry, I have taken some more time. Thank you.
Sir, I will have to pass the mic to you. I hope I'm audible. We're talking a lot about reclaiming history. So let me just take a diversion. How many of you go to Starbucks? You know of Starbucks, I hope, coffee place. They are selling something called turmeric latte these days. What is the ingredient of turmeric latte? Any idea? Turmeric latte? Turmeric and milk. हाँ, the poor हल्दी का दूध माँ दादी देती हैं, उनके ऊपर हम गुस्सा करेंगे. But Starbucks is selling that for around 350 rupees. We are happy to buy that because they write your name on the coffee mug, so it's fancy to have turmeric latte. That is what we are actually talking about. Just to put it very simply, reclaiming our narratives, right? That if we are not mindful now, after 75 years of independence, in terms of the academic narratives and discourses that have been created, we are in trouble, and that trouble will not end, right? When we've heard Professor Roktim and Professor Vivekanand, both of them have actually brought about a very important point in terms of what was said about the tribal or the Janjati community. That means we are talking about the narratives or the kinds of words, shabd, that have been used, right? So I will pinpoint a few words, and I'll take your perspectives on that, and especially because we have Professor Roktim, who is from history. So there are words like revolt, uprising, and then movement. And when you read these words, and when they're placed against certain activities, right, they change the entire discourse or the meaning of that action that has happened, which they've already pointed out, that tribal movements were trivialized, stating that it was just an uprising. Uprising means what? That I felt something is wrong, I will go try. If it works, that doesn't work, I will come back, or maybe I will get 2 lashing from the British and I will come back because I got scared. Right? But it was movements that took place across India because it took us 200 years to chase the British. That means thousands of people across different pockets were doing something right, though it took us 200 years, but we managed to chase them. So terms like revolt, uprising, and movement, and how they have been placed in the writings and in the books that we have read, are very, very problematic. So I would like to throw this to both of you, right? That when we're looking at these nomenclatures, whether in research or whether in the textbooks that we have been reading, how does it actually sort of hinder what we are talking about, reclaiming history?
Yes.
I think that's not working.
Yes, this is a very important issue. In most of the history books, when you read about the resistance, I would say resistance wars, these are being mentioned as merely revolt, as I said, like the revolt of 1857. But obviously, this is now many of the historians they don't believe on that. It was not a revolt; it was the first war of independence, or at least a war of independence. So similarly, the freedom struggle did not start only from the
57.
coming of the nationalist leaders in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Actually, the freedom struggle of India started soon after the colonization started. So, if we talk about Northeast, the colonization started in 1826. Interestingly, you will be delighted to know that the British had to fight two-year long battle against the Burmese. That actually both the Burmese and the British were imperialist powers, and for few months, in fact, the Burmese occupied some part of Northeast, and British they encountered with the British, which were in the borders of in the lower part of the Brahmaputra Valley. Then the encounter took place, and in the British record, they say first Anglo-Burmese war.
Yeah.
So it cost a lot. According to the British reports, it cost around 21 million pounds, which was one of the expensive war that British fought while in India. So while signing the Treaty of Yandawo in 1826, that was on 24th February, they only received 1 million pound as war indemnity, but there was a 20 million pounds deficit. So in order to collect all this money and everything, they occupied the entire Northeast India, and then gradually, of course, initially Brahmaputra Valley and then other parts. So whoever resisted them, who fought against them, they call them as savage Errantas, and it was merely a revolt in their reports, and also some sort of a criminal incident, to legitimize their rule. So this is very problematic. Therefore, we should look in a broader perspective. Suppose when I was talking about the various resistances that took place in my initial address. So when we talk about the Naga Hills, our perception of Naga Hills is quite different. But after the colonizing Brahmaputra Valley, that is Assam, they wanted to extend their boundary to the borders of Myanmar and also to Manipur. Therefore, they needed a shortcut, route that goes through the Naga Hills. Otherwise, they had to travel a long way from Silchar, Tripura, and then to Manipur. So, for that, they started a process of survey and explorations in 1830s. So, immediately that with the commencement of their survey and explorations, the Nagas inhabiting that area started their strong resistance. And it took, as I said, many decades to establish their administration. So it took till 1885, they had to wait. And this initial period till 1870, the final battle of Khanoma, you must be knowing many of you. This battle of Khanoma was a fierce battle that took place. They used cannons, mobilized thousands of British military forces. I think according to my studies as a history student, I have never come across this sort of mobilization, military mobilization, like they did to fight against the Nagas, to fight against the Adis, to fight against the Lusais, or for that matter, even in Assam. So it was a rare incident. So they had to mobilize, thousands of battalions, even divisions. A division consists of more than 5,000 militaries, and also, including the porters and other support staff. So it took so many years to colonize them. But in our academic discourses, we mention them as merely small revolt, which has probably one sentence, two sentences, one paragraph at the most. So that is really problematic. Vivek sir was telling about the massacre that was bigger than the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. You know, in 1861, the historians call them as merely a peasant uprising. But when you look at the history, the local people's perspective, the indigenous perspective, you will know that this has a close connection with the First War of Independence, 1857. There was a great hero in Assam, who was Maniram Devan, Maniram Datta Devan. He was one of the martyrs of the 1857 who wanted to mobilize the local forces and fight against the British. So there is a reference in the local, the folk songs that the Maniram Devan visited their village and encouraged them to get together all the small principalities, the tribes there, and to fight against them. But after that, he went to Calcutta, and there he was arrested and subsequently he was executed without much trial. But that inspiration remained there, and after 3 years of this revolt, so-called revolt, in 1860 they started the preparation to fight against the British. And finally in 1861, which is popularly called the Fulaguri Dhawa or Fulaguri Ron, in other history books it's the Fulaguri Revolt, this took place. And a huge number, a large number, more than 100 people actually were massacred while retaliating by the British. And after 30 years, in 1894, another very popular battle that took place in Patharua in 1894. So a lot of things had happened. But if I go on explaining, it will take hours after hours to finish. When I was referring to another point like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, it was a very emotional issue, especially for me and as well as many people in Naga Hills. So I was documenting this incident. I was visiting the places and interviewing the individuals who are almost like in 100, around 100 years and 90 years. And after that, many of them have left this world. So those people were so emotionally attached with Netaji. One of the heroes of the INA was Pushu Shuro. He was 102 years old. He's still alive. When I was interviewing him, he was so emotional. He was asking me, please find a diary, Netaji's diary. He has written my name. He appointed me as a Duhashi, the local administrator. I worked for him. I went to village, collected foods, animals, supplies for the INA, for our soldiers. I mobilized people, our children, our women. They were carrying, waters. They are carrying fire, woods. They are cooking. They are cleaning, and they were digging the trenches for INA. That is deep in the jungle in 1944, April. He said, I worked with him, and I know my leader will come back. He still believes that Netaji is there. He said, this is my village, this is my country, and I am the Prime Minister, and I appoint you. And I'll come back after vanquishing this British. I'll come back, I'll build your roads, I'll build your village schools, provide hospitals, water supplies. He believed in him. They contributed whatever possible. And interestingly, one incident, very emotional, and many others who gathered there, they said when Netaji was leaving, he was giving a farewell speech where many women and also all villagers gathered after 8 days of the stay. While delivering his speech, a few women on the back stands, they were a little bit, chatting, side talking, and also laughing sometimes. Then he asked the person, his assistant, Pusushuro, please let me know what they are talking about. Then after inquiry, he said that they were very sad about your departure. He said, you are so handsome. They were very, sad that once you go to the war front, you are supposed to go to Kohima, which is around 80 kilometers from that village. He said that there was war going on in the frontier, in the front line. So if you die, it will be a great loss, as you are a very handsome man. And they said that it would have been nice that you stay here and married to somebody among us. So that was the sentiment they had. So these sentiments still there. The women's. I have a small documentary that is published in YouTube, obviously. There you will see that women are singing, praising Netaji. They say, "Oh, you're so handsome, so beautiful. You came to liberate this country. You are, such and so and so." These are there, and the house. It was a priest house. That was a pre-Christian time. These people were not converted yet that time. So he was offered the best house of that period. He lived there, and they still keeping those utensils that were used, the bat. In fact, that was not a bat; it was a paddy, some kind of grinder that was being used as those mats, those hearth, still kept like that. And interestingly, while returning home, one of my the interpreter, he said, another story I forgot to tell you is that many people who comes there would take a small, bottle of dust from the house and keep there in their house. They believe that it is very, holy, and it is something very, precious for them spiritually. So that emotion, they believe that Netaji still lives there. So such type of emotions is attached with Netaji. Around 26 villages in Naga Hills he visited. People saw him talking to the people. Basically, he was used to travel in the night, because these allied forces there, they all the time, sending the reconnaissance missions. So one of the secret, I would say, helper of Netaji was Reverend Veketo from a village in Kohima. I interviewed with him. He said, I took him to the front line in 1944. And I had this experience of interacting with him. So he said, he explained his entire, physiology and whatever, the way he looked like. Then I realized that these histories have never been taught, never been given any importance. Interestingly, very interestingly, the Naga friends from must be knowing this. The Pusushi, the person that I interviewed, he said during the insurgency time, NSCN-led insurgency time, it was mandatory, mandatory for every Naga household to send their son and daughters to fight. He said, I never sent my son. I said, I was a patriotic man. I worked with Netaji, and I am there. Whatever you can do, whatever you like, but I'm not sending my son with you to fight against my country. So that is the emotion that lives among these people. So it is high time that we should try to know our history. And interestingly, after I published this, there is a minister called Imna Along. It's very popular in social media. He tweeted the video, and it was a lot of thousands of, if not lakhs, views. And suddenly, people from the village started calling me. They say your video gone viral, and now people are pouring in. Hundreds of people comes every day to our village to look at those relics that are there in the village. So now it is good that the villagers has now provided a piece of land to construct the Netaji Memorial, everything. It is very far, of course, from Kohima. It will take more than 5 hours to reach that village. So there are many other villages as well. So these are the emotions that are there. They are the major contributions, I would say, in our freedom struggle, right from the Lushais, the Nagas, and even the Adis. I forgot about or Adis. Adis, they defeated the British several times. The initial encounter took place from 1858 onwards. They could succeed only in 1911. That was the last, fight. Previously, there were 3-4 encounters where British lost many people, many officers. Similarly, a very unknown but very important incident of Indian freedom struggle is Ninu massacre. Have you heard this? Ninu massacre that took place in a village called Ninu in Longding district in eastern Arunachal Pradesh. These were the Wanchu people, Wanchu tribe. So there was a lieutenant called Holocom. Lieutenant Holocom, along with his company of around 100 people plus soldiers, went to survey their area in order to procure the natural resources and to colonize them. So incidentally, they were so cruel that they disturbed the funeral, these pyres of the village, and they retaliated like anything. More than 80 soldiers and the lieutenant Holocom was massacred. British wrote it as Ninu massacre. If you can Google, you might find a few articles or a few, maybe 1-2 write-ups. But these are the events that took place in Northeast, which has never been taught or told in the national media or any other
in the
platform.
discourse.
So thank you for giving this opportunity.
While responding to question Dr. Datta has posed at us, and while reflecting on this question, I believe it wasn't just a revolt or a sudden feat of emotions against the British. That wasn't that case. Again, if I want to go back to this, then I'll have to go back to the civilizational values that Indian communities have shared for a very long time on this land. And by the way, today happens to be Chhat Puja, Chhati Maiya ki Jai Ho, and I wish you a very best on this pious occasion. And this festival offers prayers to sun god, right? The rising sun and the setting sun. And if we look at the entire history of Indian communities, Indian societies, different groups, in one way or the other, we worship nature, right? So we worship, Hindu is a geographic identity, it's not religious identity. इस वो कविता में कहा है ना कि हिंदू सदा से विश्व बंधु है, जड़ चेतन अपना माना है, मानव पशु तरु गिरी सरिता में एक ब्रह्म को पहचाना है, जो चाहे जिस पथ से आए साधक केंद्र बिंदु पहुंचेगा. मानव पशु तरु पेड़ गिरी सरिता सभी में एक ब्रह्म को पहचाना है. एंड इसमें देखिए आप, मतलब सभी सोशल ग्रुप्स में इन वन वे और द अदर, आई माइसेल्फ कम फ्रॉम वन ऑफ द रिमोटेस्ट ट्राइबल एरियाज ऑफ इंडिया, और वहां पर आप देखिए जो सीजन्स होते हैं, जो हम मतलब अनाज उगाने के पहले, अनाज को काटने के पहले, हर चीज का हम सेलिब्रेशन करते हैं, और वो हर समाज में है, वो जनजाति समाज में भी है. और इसलिए आप अगर देखेंगे तो महाराणा प्रताप के साथ सभी लोग छोड़ के चले गए. सभी राजपूत जो है वो मुगलों के साथ दोस्ती कर रहे थे, और महाराणा प्रताप एक ही जो है अपने अस्मिता को बचाने के लिए, मैम ने जो अस्मिता, अस्तित्व और विकास की बात जो की, अपने अस्मिता और अस्तित्व को बचाने के लिए महाराणा प्रताप जब लड़ाई लड़ रहे थे तो उनके सगे भाई शक्ति सिंह वो भी मुगलों को जाकर मिले थे. ऐसी परिस्थिति में पुंजा भील और भील कम्युनिटी के लोग उनके साथ लड़ रहे थे इस अस्मिता और अस्तित्व को बचाने के लिए. महाराष्ट्र में जो हिंदवी स्वराज्य की स्थापना हुई, उनको एक बार अपने सरदारों ने पूछा, महाराज कहां तक जाना है? तो शिवाजी महाराज ने कहा था कि सिंधु नदीच्या, मराठी में, मैं मराठी हूं तो मैं हिंदी में समझाऊंगा आपको. वो कहते कि सिंधु नदीच्या उगमापासून कावेरीच्या संगमापर्यंत हिंदवी स्वराज्य हे तर श्रींची इच्छा. इसका मतलब सिंधु नदी से जहां उगम होता है वहां से कावेरी का संगम, मतलब पूरा साउथ तक ये हिंदवी स्वराज्य है। ये श्री मतलब भगवान की इच्छा है। तो वो उनके साथ वो जब लड़ रहे थे आदिल शाह और कुतुब शाह, जो आदिल शाह बीजापुर का साम्राज्य था, कुतुब शाह इधर गोलकोंडा मतलब अभी हैदराबाद वगैरह का जो एरिया आता है, तो उनके साथ महादेव कोली नाम की जो ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी है वो लड़ रही थी, जो मावले कहते हैं मराठाओं वो जो थे। तो ये अगर हम यहाँ से शुरुआत करते हैं, उसके आगे भी पहले भी शुरुआत करते हैं, जैसे मैंने कहा था नॉर्थ ईस्ट की बात, आप अगर झारखंड में सभी जगह जाओगे तो भगवान श्री राम को वो अपना भांजा मानते हैं, राइट। तो ये कैसे हुआ है? और भगवान श्री राम जब गए तो इतना सहर्ष स्वागत और स्वीकार कैसे किया उनको वनों में? हमें यहां से शुरुआत करनी होगी। और हमारी हिस्ट्री रिटन नहीं है सभी जगह, वी रिलाइड ऑन द ओरल हिस्ट्री। हमारे यहाँ पर पूरे ग्रंथ ही पाठ किए जाते थे। महाराष्ट्र में ज्ञानेश्वरी जो गीता का मराठी में अनुवाद है वो हर घर में पाठ किया जाता है। बहुत सारे लोगों के घरों में गीता पाठ होती है। अब तो अब नई जनरेशन को तो ये सब चीजें नहीं है। देयरफॉर वी हैव टू रिक्लेम द हिस्ट्री। कम से कम हमारी कुछ तो मूविंग्स हमारे यहाँ पर होनी चाहिए। इसलिए अगर आप देखें तो ये रिवॉल्ट्स नहीं थे, ये हम अपराइजिंग्स नहीं है, ये सडन फीट ऑफ इमोशंस में किया हुआ एक रिस्पॉन्स नहीं था ब्रिटिशों के खिलाफ। दैट वाज अ वेल प्लान्ड आउट स्ट्रेटेजी टू प्रोटेक्ट अस्मिता, अस्तित्व। विकास की बात तो अभी वो चलती रहती, बिकॉज वो अव्याहत अविरल चलने वाली प्रक्रिया है। अपने अस्मिता और अस्तित्व को बचाए रखने के लिए ये लड़ी जाने वाली लड़ाई थी। आप इसलिए देखे तो भीलों की लड़ाई हुई, खासियों की लड़ाई हुई, संथालों की लड़ाई हुई, अन्य सारे मतलब गोंडों की लड़ाइयां हुई। ये कोई लड़ाइयां 1 या 2 सालों तक की लड़ाइयां चली नहीं है, ये लड़ाइयां बहुत लंबे समय तक चली है, 20 साल, 25 साल, 30 साल, 50 साल। और इनमें से बहुत सारी लड़ाइयां तो 1857, कम से कम वीडी सावरकर ने पहली बार फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम ही सेड दैट 1857 wasn't a sepoy mutiny or Indian revolt, it was India's first war of independence। और उनको बुक को बैन किया गया था। And then that book was distributed among most of the revolutionaries across the country। और लेकिन हमारे यहाँ पर क्या बताया गया? अभी जो दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में वीडी सावरकर, नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस और भगत सिंह की जो प्रतिमाएं साथ में लगाई थी तो उसको गिराया गया। ये कौन से नैरेटिव हमको फीड किए गए और क्यों किए गए? एंड व्हाई आर वी कंज्यूमिंग देम एंड वी आर सस्टेनिंग आवर इंटेलेक्चुअल क्या कहते हैं, इंटेलेक्चुअल पोषण जो हमारा है वो अभी तक हम जो न्यूट्रिशन अभी भी चल रहा है हमारा, उसी के आधार पर। इसको हमें डिसमेंटल करते हुए हमारा डीकोलोनाइज्ड नैरेटिव्स लाने के लिए इन चीजों को समझने की आवश्यकता है। एक रिवॉल्ट 20 सालों के लिए, 30 सालों के लिए, 50 सालों के लिए नहीं चलता है, तो अपने अस्मिता, अस्तित्व को बचाए रखने के लिए था। और ये अस्मिता और ये अस्तित्व जो है वो हिस्ट्री से जुड़ा हुआ है, जहां पर यहां पर किसी को भी नीचा नहीं समझा गया। ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज तो बिल्कुल नहीं, ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज हाँ, बट पैरेलली अगर हम ये माने, नगर, ग्राम और वन, इन तीनों भी एक अपनी 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 ऑटोनॉमी थी इनमें। ऐसा नहीं था कि एक व्यवस्था दूसरी व्यवस्था पर अपना प्रभाव जमा रही है। हमारे यहाँ पर जो ट्राइबल एरियाज थे, हम आर्य चाणक्य के अर्थशास्त्र में भी पाते हैं कहीं कहीं उनके उदाहरण, कि वो कहते हैं कि जो अटविक सेना कहा जाता था, वो जंगल में रहने वाले ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज की जो आर्मी थी उसको एक रिजर्व सेना की तरह देखा जाता था, और उसमें कोई इंटरफियर नहीं किया जाए, इस प्रकार का सजेशन, एडवाइसेस जो है आर्य चाणक्य चंद्रगुप्त को, मौर्य को दे रहे हैं। उसको डिसमेंटल करने की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं। उस प्रकार के प्रयास कभी नहीं हुए पहले, क्योंकि ये तीनों भी कल्चर्स पैरेलली चलती रही। ये तीनों कल्चर्स नहीं कहूंगा, तीनों भी व्यवस्थाएं, सिस्टम्स, ये सिस्टम, सोशल सिस्टम्स तीनों भी पैरेलली चलती रही। देयर वर लॉट ऑफ कोइंसाइडिंग पॉइंट्स बिटवीन दीस सिस्टम्स, सोशल सिस्टम्स, पर ये इसको डिसमेंटल नहीं किया गया। मुगलों ने करने की कोशिश की थी, दे ट्राइड, पर उनको पता, बहुत ज्यादा मार खाई उन लोगों ने, और उन्होंने कहा कि देयर इज नो पॉइंट इन डूइंग दैट, एंड दे अगेन कन्फाइंड देमसेल्व्स टू द नगर और ग्राम, यहां तक ही कन्फाइंड रहे। लेकिन ब्रिटिशों ने ये फॉरेस्ट एक्ट्स, उसके बाद में ब्रिटिशों के साथ मैंने कहा सिविलाइजिंग मिशन, व्हाइट मैन्स बर्डन, एंड देयरफॉर दिस पीपल आर इन डार्कनेस एंड दे नीड टू बी ब्रॉट इन लाइट, दे नीड टू बी एनलाइटेंड, एंड देयरफॉर देन चार्टर एक्ट्स के माध्यम से इवेंजेलिकल मिशंस वर अलाउड. और ये जो अपराइजिंग्स हुए हैं, दे आर नॉट जस्ट फॉर जल जंगल और जमीन, उनकी अस्मिता और अस्तित्व के लिए भी वो लड़ाइयां थी, क्योंकि जबरदस्ती अगर उनको कन्वर्ट किया जा रहा था और अपनी फेथ उन पर अगर इंपोज किया जा रहा था, दे वर रिस्पॉन्डिंग टू दैट इंपोजिशन ऑल्सो. भगवान बिरसा मुंडा का उदाहरण देखिए. भगवान बिरसा मुंडा कन्वर्ट्स एंड देन ही कम्स बैक टू हिज ओरिजिनल फेथ. सिंह बोंगा भगवान को मानने की बात करते हैं, बिरसाई धर्म की स्थापना करते पुनः. तो ये क्यों हो रहा था? व्हाई वाज इट हैपनिंग? अगेन टू प्रोटेक्ट अस्मिता और अस्तित्व. ये इसलिए हो रहा था, इसलिए हम इनको सिर्फ रिवॉल्ट्स नहीं कह सकते. ये मेरा मानना है.
Both of you have actually shed, a very critical answer to what I was saying, in terms of how the nomenclatures are important, right? So when we're saying reclaiming, we have to reread these things, right? I don't want to send a message through our discussion that we're asking everybody to throw the books that have been written. But what we're trying to tell everyone is that we have to reread what's being written. If there is a word uprising or revolt or savage or wild or barbarian and so forth, what does it imply? And what is the intent of every word that has been written in these books? I'll give you a small little example. You will find these books, even unfortunately, in the archives even today, called a series of books called People of India. Right now, that is I think 6 or 8 volumes of books are there, and it's an anthropological study which said that we want to understand the people of India and we are going to document it. They only simply said people of India have different kinds of faces. They are square, round, elliptical. They have different features, and that was the categorization they made. And we have gone on to use those books for a very long time to understand who the people of India are. Right? Another reference I'll give you is that of the National Park Policy. Some of you who have read or done anything on tribal studies would have come across a colonial writer called Verrier Elvin, who had proposed this idea called National Park Policy, stating that these are wild and savage people. They cannot intermingle in the larger community. So let's establish a separate space for them and put them in a certain box. What was the intent? Right? Administrative convenience. Like he mentioned, they were facing resistance. They were facing strong opposition, and something had to be done so that the British administration can run smoothly, right? So when we're talking about the history, we have to understand what was or who was in charge of writing the history. It's a very loose phrase in Hindi which says, "Jiski lathi uski bhain." Some of you may have heard of that, right? So the question is, whose history are we talking about, or who wrote the history, right? And therefore, this entire discourse needs to be re-evaluated. We're not talking about throwing and burning the books away, right? And in that discussion, we had come up with another very important concept, that was image versus reality. And I would request the two of you to shed a light on that, maybe with some examples or whatever that comes, because I think this is a discourse or a space that needs to be going out to people when we're talking about image versus reality. I'll give one example from my own fieldwork, and then I'll hand it over to the both of you. I come from Shillong, and my work has been in that domain, right? So a very big thing that is spoken about the Khasi tribe is that it is a matriarchal society, right? The nomenclature that has been used all over in terms of the Khasi tribe is matriarchal. That is an incorrect representation of the community. The community is matrilineal. So you may think, what is the big difference between lineal and archi? Archi means authority and power. Lineal means lineage. Whose surname are we using? So if we say matrilineal, the Khasis are a matrilineal society because they trace their lineage through the mother, right? But the moment we say matriarchy, that means the women are, ruling the roost and head of state and all of that. That is not the case. Are you getting what I'm trying to tell you? that two words, they seem similar, just the last part, 3 words here and there, and the entire understanding about a community can change. Image versus reality. So even a comma or a full stop can change what we're trying to say. So this is one example, and I'll request both our panelists to bring in these points in the context of image versus reality.
Very interesting. Image versus reality. Before I go into that, let me tell you that the resistances, in fact, happened for various reasons. One is obviously colonial encroachment, imposition of their rule. Another is that to save their, traditional practices. We know a very important figure. It's called Haipu Januna.
Yeah.
He started a Heraka movement among the Jelliangong
Tribe
group, especially Manipur. So that where he in that Heraka movement, he was emphasizing to go back to their roots and follow their traditional way of worship, because he saw many people out of economic hardship. They were actually invited by the British, and then took that opportunity, economic hardship, as an opportunity to convert them to Christianity. Similarly, there was a great hero among the Dimasa tribe called Samudhan Bir Samudhan Fongo. He also did the same thing. Similarly, after Haipo Jalunang, interestingly, I went through the archival records. Haipo Jalunang was hanged for not because he was not involved at all. I went through the eyewitness accounts of 25 people. Out of 20, more than 20 maybe, they said that he was not involved in that incident. He was accused of murdering 2 individuals. 20% they said he was not involved. Despite that, he was hanged. It was a conspiracy, but just to save the British ideology and to disrupt his Heraka movement. Subsequently, Rani Daidalu, she took it up, and she was imprisoned for life. She was released after India got independent. So these are the histories that we should know. So the image, I would say, the image that we know about the tribes is quite like the Bollywood, other social media influences. But if you look at the different tribes in Northeast India, for that matter, so it's about the tribes in northern North India, Central India. Say the Khasis, they know how to smelt iron for the last 2,000 years. They know how to trade for the last 2,000 years. The peninsulas of the Erythraean Sea, that was written around 1st century CE. It speaks about the Khasi people, the tribes of Northeast, various other tribes, that they were trading in a trade fair, going down to the coast of the, Bay of Bengal. So they were so organized, technically so advanced. When we talk about the Nagas, the British, told them, portrayed them as headhunters, essentially. These were really all well-organized society. They have chieftainship. They have, norms for marriages. There were systematic, observation of all rituals. Their society was so organized. They were never savage. These savagery, barbarism, and civilization. This comes from evolutionary anthropologists like Louis Henry Morgan and all those people who, while studying the Indian tribes, they call it Indian tribes of those South America and North America, especially the Apaches, the Hopis, the Comanches. While studying those areas, they said these people were, they are still in the savagery. They need some time to grow up to the barbarism, then they will civilize. So they saw it in that way. So image creation is very easy, but the reality is different. Therefore, we should come out of our comfort and look at their society, their technical advancements. If we look at the history of Assam, the oldest inscription that is found in the Brahmaputra Valley is from the 5th century, and this is written in Sanskrit, interestingly, 1500 years ago. And these are in Devanagari script. And subsequently, we found many other scripts. So they know how progressive they were, how advanced they were. Sanskrit was perhaps an official language there. We're talking about 5th century. They were parallel, contemporary to the Guptas at the time. You will find that the people of Northeast, they were celebrating Durga Puja. Some people say that Durga Puja came only after the Bengalis migrated during the colonial period as Babu officers. Interestingly, the images that we found, these are preserved in the Assam State Museum from the 10th century, from 11th century. Image of Durga, Saraswati. Please visit Assam State Museum. You will find the Vishnu images, huge statues. The sun, statues of sun god, Surya. These are from the 7th, 8th, 10th century. So, images is very easy to create, but the reality is really different. So, we should believe in reality and go back to the primary sources. Don't believe on the secondary sources. Don't believe on the writings of various, writings are done with, most of them with various intentions. I do not want to, say anything about that. But when we say history, people say that it should be impartial, it should be objective.
Yeah.
But most of the histories so far been written are not objective. It is always influenced by some sort of ideology or narrative. Therefore, I always tell my students, go back to the primary sources. Read Arthasastra yourself. Don't depend others while explaining Arthasastra. Go back to Yuan Sang's, at least a translated version. Yuan Sang's Yuki. Go back and see. Last few weeks ago, I was teaching about the primary sources, and I was talking about Arthasastra and also the foreign accounts of Yuan Sang and It Singh and also Fahian. I was just explaining about the English translation of those books. Some students said that, sir, these are written all positives, everything is positive about India. How come? I said, it's not about positive or negative. It is about their feeling. Whatever they saw, they have written. We might feel like today it is something positive. It's talking about in Siyuki, that is in the 7th century. He was talking that Indians, they don't have locks on their doors. So many things he said about the wage and measure system, organized society, the rituals and everything. These are not positive or negative. These are the truth. These are the facts. They have, put it down. We have to look in that sense. We have to look from their perspective. And therefore, I appeal here. Well, while studying the tribal histories, I think we should also try to, have some sort of field work or field visit or visit to those places. Like when I say about the Khasis were smelting iron from the last 2,000 years, if you go to Shillong or in Cherrapunji, go to those places, still those furnaces are being kept.
Yeah.
These megalithic structures are still there. The oral traditions are still active, still prevalent. So the tribes of Northeast India, for that matter, the Bhils, the Koraus, the Santals, they were quite advanced, but maybe British termed them as tribes because they consider that they are out of the Varna system. This may have been the basic classification. Otherwise, they worship nature. The Vedic people worship nature. They worship many, mountains, rivers. These were the practices that Nagas did. The Lusais were doing. The Tivas were doing. The Divasas were doing. They were worshipping their ancestors. These are not a different cult or religion. These were very much a part of Indian tradition that continues still today. So that's what I would like to say.
Again, while reflecting on this notion of image versus reality, to an extent, I had spoken that in my opening remarks. I'll cite an examples now, since has given exhaustive explanation of from his experiences from the northeastern states. I come from the central India, and primarily I was born and brought up in a tribal group called Madia or Muria or Maria. You guys, if you try to search it out on Google, you will come to know about that. That tribe generally is found in on the borders of Maharashtra, means Gadchiroli, Chandrapur, Bhandara, if you have heard about these districts, and then certain parts of Chhattisgarh
Chhattisgarh.
and certain parts of Madhya Pradesh, Telangana. So these are the regions in which this Madhya community is found out. If you, some of you, would not recommend that for you, but if you are preparing for UPSC, some of you, since a lot of IITians have started taking up these exams, um, you would have heard about that, the Madhya community. Uh, there is a the scheduled tribes, fifth and sixth
Sixth
schedule has been dedicated to the tribal communities. And then we have PESA Act 1996, Panchayat Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act, which was the extension of the Panchayat Act that came in 1992. So after 4 years, that Panchayati Raj Act was extended to the Scheduled Areas Act, and therefore that was named as Panchayat Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act. And then in 2006, they came up with the act which has a very long name, Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditionally Forest Dwellers, in bracket, Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006, or simply put, Forest Rights Act 2006, FRA 2006. So these rights have given certain rights to the tribal communities. You, just to rewind your UPSC preparation, I gave you these some details. You must have heard about PVTG. PVTG means particularly vulnerable tribal group. PVTG. So these PVTGs are a subcategory within the tribal group, which is the such tribal groups which are very low on all sorts of development indicators. The population is decreasing and everything. So these communities have been put into that category. So I was born and brought up in one of such tribal groups. I speak that language. I culturally belong to that group. Only recently I celebrated Diwali with my own people there. So this community has a social institution in every village called Gotul, in which the village people come together. They discuss on very many issues which are concerning their village and the society at large. They offer worship. They resolve the disputes between the groups or to individuals. So that the place of gathering is called Gotul. But then most of the sociologists have described Gotul as the place of sex education, or a place where men and women come together and they have sex. This is the projection of the tribal community which has been put into the books. But I come from that place. I never saw that happening, because in most of the times in Gotul, women don't go often. That one aspect. So that is a place of social gathering wherein a lot of decisions related to society are taken. But then Gotul has been described in another way. Other way. These are the wildly people, beastly people. Some of such descriptions can be found in various books. If you interact with people who have lived among them, they will tell you that they are the most inclusive people. They do not have any sense of gender discrimination. महिला और पुरुषों में कोई अंतर नहीं है, और महिला पुरुष दोनों भी मिलकर काम करते हैं, और उसमें पुरुष सुपीरियर है और महिला इंफीरियर है, इस प्रकार का भाव नहीं है. They dance together in the evening, in the night, around the fire or wherever they can. and men and women dance together, at least in certain tribal communities. May not be in all the tribal communities, but the tribal communities I was born and brought up in, I'm sharing my experiences. So उस कम्युनिटी में men and women dance together till 11. गांव में 7-8 बजे सो जाते हैं, 8:30 बजे, एट द मोस्ट 9 बजे तो सो ही जाते हैं, कोई नहीं बचता है. बट दिस यंग पीपल डांस टिल 11, 11:30, sometimes 12. But there is no single example of rape or फीमेल एक्सप्लॉयटेशन. और इसलिए वो जो जो अब जो चल रहा है सेक्सुअल हरासमेंट ऑफ वर्क प्लेस, सेंसिटाइजेशन के कैंप्स, ये सब करने की आवश्यकता नहीं पड़ती है वहां पर. तो हमें जो बताया गया है कि वो उस एरिया से मत जाओ, वो कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, तो ये जो बताया गया है दैट इज अ इमेज, बट इन रियलिटी दैट इज नॉट अ केस. एंड देन दूसरी बात यह है कि ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज हैव ऑलवेज रिमेन एक्सक्लूडेड, ऐसा भी नहीं है. सी आई एम बॉर्न अमंग देम, बट आई एम ethnically तो कुछ कहेंगे नहीं, क्योंकि we lived in among them for so many years. Now we are ethnically also the tribals in that way, but I am not tribal. Constitutionally, culturally, I am tribal. My at least 5-6 generations have before my ancestors have come and resided in that area in various villages, and they live together. Most of us speak Madhya language only. अब वो इतना इंटरमिंगलिंग हुआ और 5-6 जनरेशन पहले अगर वो आए हैं तो कुछ तो सेंस ऑफ एक्सेप्टेंस रहा होगा, तभी तो स्वीकार किया ना, नहीं तो उनको तो मार के खा जाते ना. अगर वो कैनिबल्स है, मैन ईटर्स है, अगर ये आइडिया है तो देखो दे वुड हैव ईटन देम अप. सो ये जिस प्रकार की इमेजेस बनाई गई है, ये इमेजेस को अगर हमें करेक्ट करना है तो वी विल हैव टू लिव अमंग देम. कम से कम हमको ये जो वो जो प्रोफेसर मैडम की मैंने बात कही थी, शी हैज रिटन 12 बुक्स, बट शी हैज रिटन बुक्स बाय रीडिंग सेकेंडरी लिटरेचर. जो सर कह रहे थे, प्राइमरी लिटरेचर मींस आर्काइवल जो भी मटेरियल होगा, एंड अनदर थिंग इज ओरल हिस्ट्री की उनमें रह करके उन्हें समझने की आवश्यकता होती है. हमें से अगर समय मिल पाए, अभी नहीं तो कभी आगे चल करके आप कॉर्पोरेट वर्ल्ड में आप काम करना शुरू करें और CSR के माध्यम से कभी जाने की आपको उस प्रकार की अपॉर्चुनिटी अगर मिल जाए, तो गो एंड मिंगल इन दोस सोसाइटीज, ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड देम एज दे आर without or instead of trying to understand them through books or through movies. That one aspect when it comes to image versus reality I wanted to highlight. Another thing is the British, for their own administrative convenience, they called certain tribal groups as the criminal tribes because they were the most they were facing the fiercest resistance. सबसे भयंकर जो प्रतिकार और प्रतिरोध जो हो रहा था ब्रिटिशों का, उन ट्राइब्स में हो रहा था, एंड देयरफॉर दे टर्म दोस ट्राइब्स एज द क्रिमिनल ट्राइब्स. और उनको एक्सक्लूडेड एरियाज और पार्शियली एक्सक्लूडेड एरियाज में रखा गया, एंड देयर वाज नो रूल whenever they wanted to commit any brutality against any of such person, they could do that. So therefore, and after British left, and still we have those categories, we consider them as criminal tribes. अभी भी भीलों के बारे में कहा जाता है कि वो वहां से उस एरिया से मत गुजरना, वो तो लूट लेते हैं, वो मार देते हैं. These notions are still there. कहीं ना कहीं होता होगा, but not everywhere. तो ये जो जनरल परसेप्शन है, उस परसेप्शन को भी डू अवे करने की आवश्यकता है. Another thing that I want to say you is, ये जो हमको बताया गया है कि हिंदू आइडेंटिटी को इम्पोज किया जा रहा है ट्राइबल आइडेंटिटी के ऊपर. द हिंदू आइडेंटिटी इज बीइंग इम्पोज्ड ऑन ट्राइबल आइडेंटिटी. It's not a unilateral journey. Most of the scholars have observed that it is a bilateral exchange, mutual exchange. Certain practices of tribal communities have influenced the the mainstream Hindu society, and the Hindu culture also has influenced the tribal cultures. अब महादेव की बात करते हैं तो बहुत सारे स्कॉलर्स का मानना है भगवान शिव इज अ ट्राइबल गॉड. बहुत सारे लोगों का यह मानना है. And this tribal god is incorporated in mainstream Hindu civilizational values. और उसमें भगवान शिव को जो है, अब वो अपने हिसाब से इन्होंने बनाया। अब उसको बड़ा पेन मतलब बड़ा वाला देव, बड़ा देव, बूढ़ा देव, पेरसा पेन, हमारी उधर की भाषा में उसको पेरसा मतलब बड़ा, पेरसा मतलब बड़ा होता है, तो पेरसा पेन, इन नामों से उनको कहा गया है। सो दैट इनकॉर्पोरेशन हैज टेकन प्लेस, और म्यूचुअल एक्सचेंज। और हमने कहा कि ये स्वामी विवेकानंद, व्हेन ही वाज टॉकिंग at World Religious Parliament in 1893, he says that our culture doesn't teach us to tolerate somebody, it teaches us to accept। इसीलिए जो इसलिए देखिए कि ये जो इजराइल जब बना, तो इजराइल ने क्या कहा था कि we were persecuted across the world, India was the only land we were accepted, and we were given every right to live according to our own ethos. So this is the value I think we need to understand. So these are some of the 2-3 points I wanted to highlight.
Just I want to add a story. It was in 1999. One of my friends, his name was Buddha Taro. He was basically a Kargi fellow. एक अपना महाराज जाति थे, तो they went to Madhya Pradesh somewhere, two of his friends, and one evening while they were waiting for a train, उसमें बहुत inaccessible, संबल का कुछ एरिया था, तो उसमें हम लोग बैठे हुए थे, तो सडनली वो बहुत डेकोइट इन्फेस्टेड एरिया है, तो कई एक गैंग आ गया था वहाँ पे, कि when they saw him, like he doesn't look like them, और उनका चेहरा अलग सा है, तो उनके पास आके पूछे आप कहाँ से, तो उन्होंने बोला कि मैं ऐसे ऐसे जगह से हूँ, तो वो कहाँ पे है, तो वह नागालैंड के पास है क्या, बोला हाँ हाँ नागालैंड के पास है, ऑब्वियसली नागालैंड के पास ही है अपना डिस्ट्रिक्ट, बोला नागा हुआ, वो हिंदी को इतना आता नहीं है, तो फिर उन्होंने बोला कि नागा तो कैनिबल्स है, हमारा आदमी खाता है, ऐसा द इमेज उनके हेड हंटर्स, ये वो अंग्रेजों की वजह से, या फिल्म या कोई उस समय सोशल मीडिया तो था नहीं, भी जो भी सुना उनको लगा कि वो कैनिबल है, फिर वो पास में आके और इंटरेस्ट लिया और अलग अलग बातें पूछने लगा, तो वो भी लगा कि ये रिकॉर्ड टाइप के बॉस लोग हैं, गुंडा टाइप के हैं, तो इसको जो ही पूछे ऐसे उसको मतलब इंटरटेन करने के लिए अलग अलग तरह से कहानी बना के उन्होंने जवाब देना शुरू किया, कि वो मतलब ऐसे क्वेश्चन शुरू हुए कि कैसे लोग वो खाते हैं, क्या करते हैं ना, कैसे भागते हैं, तो उन्होंने क्या क्या जवाब दिया वो मुझे याद नहीं है, लेकिन लास्ट में जब बैठे हुए थे तो उसको बात करते करते उन्होंने ऐसे छुआ, मतलब उसको ऐसे, तो वो इतना डर गए, मतलब वो डेकोइट मतलब पूरा ऐसे हटा के वो पीछे हट गए, तो बोला इसको मेरे को भी खाने वाला तो ये डर ना बातें करते करते उनके दिल में ऐसे एक इमेज बन गया मेरा दोस्त का, ये लोग दोनों ही थे, लोग के 10-12 लोग थे, वो एकदम बॉस टाइप से डेकोइट्स थे एक प्रकार से। रेलवे स्टेशन में वो लोग बैठे हुए थे, तो रेलवे स्टेशन में बहुत अंदर वाला कुछ जगह था, मध्य प्रदेश का ट्राइबल एरिया था, या संबल का आसपास घर से बताते, तो फिर उसने मतलब जो रिएक्शन दिया उससे लगा कि रियली ये तो डर गया है कैनिबल से, इसलिए इसके बाद वो पूरा बहुत अच्छा से बात करके फिर वहां से वो चले गए। तो उन्होंने बोला ये जो इमेज बनाया था हमारा किसी ने नॉर्थ ईस्ट या नागालैंड के ऊपर या इस तरह का, एक प्रकार से अच्छा भी है, एक प्रकार से बहुत बुरा भी है। अच्छा इसलिए था कि हम लोग शायद इसीलिए हम लोग लूटा नहीं, और वो बहुत ज्यादा इंटरेस्ट ले ले, बहुत देर बात ही हो, तो ये एक छोटा सा इंसिडेंट मैं शेयर कर रहा हूँ।
We had started from reclaiming histories in the context of freedom struggle, but I think we've touched upon, I think, a holistic picture of what we're trying to say when we're talking about tribal leaders, tribal movement, and Indian history. Before we close, if there are any questions that any one of you wants to, ask our panelists, please let me know.
Any question? No question is a stupid question. You can have any curiosity in your mind.
Yeah, we have a hand there. Yes.
Thank you. So I express my sincere gratitude to the faculty members who had established Bhagwan Birsa Munda Seal at the IIT Delhi, because I'm from Bhagwan Birsa Munda land, Jharkhand. So झारखंड में करीब 32 ट्राइब्स हैं, उनमें से 8 ऐसे हैं जो पीवीटीजी से हैं। सर अगर उन 8 में से एक की सिर्फ बात करेंगे, वो है सर्वर जनजाति। उनकी स्थिति ऐसी है कि आज यदि आप उनके पास जाए, भारत के शिक्षित लोगों में से हैं, तो आज अगर जाए तो उनके बारे में लिखना स्टार्ट करेंगे कि इनकी हालत ऐसी स्थिति और कोई जानते नहीं है। और उनकी संख्या पिछले 20-30 सालों में इतनी घटी है कि अब वो विलुप्त होने की स्थिति में है। लेकिन उनकी वर्तमान स्थिति को यहाँ जैसे शिक्षित लोग बैठे हुए हैं, हमें नहीं पता कि ऐसे भी कम्युनिटी है। अगर पता होगा तो जरूर उनके ऊपर 1-2 पेज लिखे होते, अच्छे आर्टिकल तो छपे होते। तो वो जो स्थिति है उनमें 8 में से कईयों की स्थिति है जो लिखने लायक है। हम अभी सिर्फ एक की कह रहे हैं कि क्यों प्रश्न पूछने को उसे, तो वो जो स्थिति है उसे हम, ये जो शिक्षित लोग हैं वो कैसे उन तक पहुंचेंगे या उनकी बात को कैसे लिखेंगे, ये इसके बारे में थोड़ा सा अगर आप मार्गदर्शन करें तो अच्छा होगा प्लीज।
Should I answer?
हाँ, प्लीज।
थैंक यू आपके क्वेश्चन के लिए। आपका नाम, शुभ नाम अगर आप बता दें।
थैंक यू मैडम, मेरा नाम चक्रभूषण है।
Thank you. On behalf of both of them, I'm taking the leverage to answer this question. अगर जो पूरी चर्चा हुई जिसपे हमने कहा कि हमें रिक्लेम करना है, देखना है, राइट, तो इसका एक ही आंसर है कि हमें कम्युनिटी के पास वापस जानी है। बहुत अच्छी बात तो नहीं है कि उनके बारे में कोई डॉक्यूमेंट है या नहीं है, बट अगर आपके मन में कोई भी जिज्ञासा भी है इस पीवीटीजी कम्युनिटी को लेके, वी हैव टू गो बैक टू द फील्ड, जिसको हम कहते हैं इमर्सिव एक्सरसाइज, राइट। और कोई क्वेश्चनर लेके नहीं कि गांव में कितने घर हैं, 50 लोग हैं, आपके पास खाना है, खाना नहीं है, गवर्नमेंट सुविधाएं पहुंच रही है, नहीं पहुंच रही है, एंड देन आके लिख देंगे कि ये इसकी स्थिति बहुत खराब है और सरकार कुछ नहीं कर रही है। वी आर नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट दैट. We are talking about the fact that we go and we engage and we understand the community from their lived experiences. And when we say lived experiences, we're talking about what they will tell us, not what we have as a preconceived notion. एक जो bias होता है ना कि हम जाएंगे तो गरीबी भुखमरी ही देखेंगे, टेलीफोन का नेटवर्क नहीं होगा, मुझे मच्छर काटेंगे, शायद पीने को पानी नहीं होगा। ये जो एक बायस्ड अप्रोच है, हमें उससे हटके एक क्लीन स्लेट लेके जानी है, एंड वॉट एवर इज द लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस ऑफ दैट कम्युनिटी, वी हैव टू ब्रिंग दैट बैक. दैट इज द अप्रोच. वो जो 10 क्वेश्चन है, 10 मिनट का टाइम हर घर में भर के 100 क्वेश्चन, बार्स, डायग्राम एंड चार्ट्स, उससे नहीं होने वाला है, राइट. एंड अगर जैसे आपने कहा, आपने ये कम्युनिटी आइडेंटिफाई की है, जब भी आपको वक्त मिले, अगर किसी को गाइड भी कर रहे हैं, इमर्सिव फील्ड विजिट इज द आंसर, एंड नॉट like sir was mentioning, writing something from an AC library or secondary literature or books like People of India. फिर हम वो नहीं कर पाएंगे जो हम करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, reclaiming narratives. I hope I answer your question. Yeah.
अच्छा, दूसरी बात इसी में मैं ऐड करना चाह रहा था इनके लिए. I think I am audible to them. अब हम most of us may not go for PhD.
Yeah.
सो देखिए, हम तो यहाँ पर हमारा दिस इज आवर लाइफ टाइम जॉब, सर, मी, मैम, एंड हम इनके मार्गदर्शन में हम काम करते हैं, सर के, और बाकी हमारे वरिष्ठ लोग यहाँ पर बैठे हुए हैं। उनके सामने भी यहाँ पर बैठना भी एक थोड़ा सा नर्वसनेस के भाव तो है ही, लेकिन उन्होंने बुलाया इसलिए बोलना पड़ता है, इसलिए यहाँ पर बैठ करके बड़ी बड़ी बातें कर रहे हैं। बट एनीवेज, हम कहते हैं कि मोस्ट ऑफ अस मे नॉट बी द रिसर्चर्स, मे नॉट गो फॉर PhD, may not be equipped with those research skills.
Yeah.
और for example, देखिए, ऐसी कुछ communities पे काम करने के लिए आपको ICSSR वगैरह प्रोजेक्ट देती है। हमारा रोल हम क्या कर सकते हैं कि आज we live in सिटीजन जर्नलिज्म का एज है। ये आपके पास व्हाट्सएप है, आपके पास सोशल मीडिया है, आप इन चीजों को अगर हाईलाइट करते रहे, एंड देयर आर रिसर्चर्स हु आर फाइंडिंग आउट सच एरियाज। हो सकता है कि they lived in cities and they do not know about this. They will get to know about your story and they will try to find out more about that community. जैसे मैं मेरे गांव में गया था, it's been 2-3 सालों के बाद गया था, तो मेरे गांव के वहां पे आगे किसी गांव में सिर्फ 2 ही घर है। एक गांव ऐसा है जहां पर एक ही घर है, उसमें एक ही व्यक्ति रहता है, उस घर के परिवार रहता था, परिवार के 1-2 शायद 2-3 घर थे उस गांव में, लेकिन वो नीचे की जगह पे आ गए। बट दैट मैन वो कहता है कि हमारे यहाँ पर भगवान रहते हैं, हमारे यहाँ पर वंश परंपरागत मतलब मैं यहाँ पर पला बड़ा हुआ हूँ, मैं यहाँ पर ही मरूंगा, मैं ये जगह नहीं छोड़ूंगा। तो ऐसी जगह पे जाने का अभी दैट हैज इन्वोक्ड क्यूरियोसिटी इन माय माइंड। पहले मैं नहीं जानता था ये। अब मैंने सोचा है कि कुछ सालों के बाद थोड़ा सा मुझे जब समय मिलेगा या फिर सबैटिकल्स लेकर के 5-6 महीनों का मैं एक्सक्लूसिव सर्वे करूंगा इन सारे गांवों के, और वो जो पेशा के फॉरेस्ट राइट्स एक्ट के जो भी प्रावधान है उसको मैं समझने की कोशिश करूंगा। तो एग्जैक्टली दैट क्यूरियोसिटी इन्वोक होने के लिए भी कुछ उसको क्या कहते हैं, प्रोपेलेंट लगा मुझे, है ना। तो आप इस प्रकार से हम काम कर सकते हैं अपने लेवल पे। सो अपना जो भगवान श्री राम का राम सेतु बन रहा था, तो वहां पर जो स्क्विरल थी वो भी कुछ ना कुछ डाल रही थी ना, तो उस प्रकार से अपना रोल हम प्ले कर सकते हैं, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
I think we have a question. Yeah.
I'm enjoying our last question. When we're speaking about image and reality, so when I talk about tribal communities, primarily from northeastern regions, one of the deterrent is the food habits. We all know food habits are because of the environment and what is availability and personal choices in some cases. But some of the food habits of tribals are different from the so-called mainstream Indian food habits. So that causes a deterrent to understand and intermingle with those communities. So how to sensitize or how to bridge the gap? What should be a way to bridge that gap of that food habits?
Yes, food habits is a great concern actually. Some food habits, obviously Northeast India, food habits are little different. Lesser spice, little bit of non-vegetarianism, and also having the wild vegetables and all those things. Obviously, it is not similar to the other parts of, especially North India or South India. So every territory, every area has its own specific food habits. I think food habits should not be a deterrent. Should not be a issue to differentiate culturally, socially, because since time immemorial, people are having different food habits according to, as you said,
Geographical.
That because of the climate, because of the environment, geography. Like there is a habit of eating fermented fish in Northeast India, which is very stinky. If I burn a piece of fermented fish here, entire campus will be disappointed because of its smell. But it is the habit because of the geography. The fresh fish is very difficult to get in the mountains, so these are procured from the plains, and throughout the year this will be preserved at home, in huts, in the utensils, bamboo tubes. So they will have it according to their convenience. So it is also a great source of nutrition.
Yeah.
Similarly, the what do you call it? Barbecued meats of different wild animals as well as domesticated. These are kept for for nutrition purposes, because farming is difficult there. I mean, especially in the hilly areas, like keeping ये बकरी को रखना या सुअर को रखना is a मतलब है, it's a animal husbandry is okay, but think about 200, 400, 500 years पहले का अगर सिचुएशन हम देखें तो उसमें बकरियां तो बाघ वगैरह खा जाते हैं, very difficult. So जब भी मीट होता है उसको सुखा के preserve it. So इसी तरह से they develop the food habit.
Yeah.
But obviously food habits जो यहाँ से कोई जाएंगे वहाँ पे तो disappoint होगा जरूर, थोड़ा सा culturally शॉक लगेगा क्योंकि वहाँ पे खाना या करना, बट अगर हम सोचे, और एक हैबिट से वहाँ पे आप जाएंगे, जैसे फील्ड वर्क का हमने मैनुअल पढ़ते हैं सोशल साइंस में कि कैसे रेपो बिल्ड करना है गाँव में। डायरेक्ट इन्फॉर्मेशन लोग नहीं देंगे, आप मिल गए और क्वेश्चनर दे दिया तो बोले जो भी जानता है वो भी नहीं बोलेंगे, तो कम से कम एक हफ्ता रुक के उनसे एक रिलेशनशिप डेवलप करना पड़ता है। तो उस रिलेशनशिप को कैसे डेवलप करेंगे? पहले दिन आप जाएंगे वहां पे आपको चाय की जगह फर्मेंटेड राइस बियर दे देंगे, तो बोले मैंने तो नहीं पीता ऐसा, हमारे वहां नहीं पीता, ठीक है, वो लोग मान जाएंगे, आपको नहीं देंगे, रख लेंगे। लेकिन दूसरे दिन से एक डिस्टेंस आपका क्रिएट हो गया है विद इन मिनट्स। इसके बाद वो हमेशा आपको अलग नजर से देखेंगे या आप उनको अलग तरफ से देखेंगे, है? तो आपका फील्ड वर्क तो चला गया ऐसे, they will not speak. तो इसलिए फूड हैबिट्स ऑब्वियसली डिटररेंट है, लेकिन इसको अगर हम दूसरे पर्सपेक्टिव से देखें कि एक समाज को अगर बिल्ड करना है तो इंटरेक्शंस जरूरी है, with due respect to the food habits of each other, I think we can also progress.
Just to add on, I think like you said, na, there is always a reason why we eat certain things. अगर उस चीज के बारे में if we can talk about that and bring those information to the forefront, right? I think ये जो biases हैं will slowly start to go away from the mind, that it's not about what I eat or you eat. If I'm eating something, there is a scientific reason because of what my community or my region has been following, and if you eat something, then there is a logic behind what your community, what your locality. So I think that awareness, like you said, now we will not have to think it in terms of a deterrent, but in terms of how each time we get an opportunity, how we can create an awareness. Like, right, when we say rice beer, people think ki sab daru pee ke pade rehte hain. That's the idea, right? When you go to Bhil or any tribal area, there is a concept that people are alcoholics, right? But that is not the point. It's not alcoholic per se. There is a tradition, there is a ritual, and how something is being fermented is a scientific food processing technology. Are we talking about that? Right? That what is the process? What is the food value or the nutrition value of such food? If we can talk from that perspective, right, then we will be able to add something. Like I said in the beginning, Astitva, Asmita, and Vikas. Like these perspectives of identity, existence, all of them have to be sort of pulled together. I think there was one more question, and I think that will be the last question also. That will be the last question.
I want to cite two examples, in fact.
Yeah.
देखिए, अगर आपको इन एरियाज में आपका क्यूरियोसिटी है, तो then you will have to commit yourself to these regions. आप देखिए, ब्रिटिश बहुत ही कम लोग आए थे। अब बहुत बार हम गाली देते हुए उन्होंने जो किया है, उनका जो एडवेंचर, उनका जो ब्रेवरी थी, उसको भी रिकॉग्नाइज करनी पड़ेगी। 20-20 साल वो संस्कृत पहले तो 10 साल 15 साल संस्कृत सीखा, उसको फिर बाद में उन्होंने मिस इंटरप्रिटेशन किया। ये कोई एक दिन की बात नहीं थी, सारा जीवन लगा दिया था उन लोगों ने। वेरियर एल्विन की बात मैम ने छेड़ी। He married all his life. He married tribal women.
Yeah.
He was a white Christian.
Yeah.
अब another person who write on माडिया कम्युनिटी के बारे में, जिसके बारे में मैंने कहा, बस्तर नाम का जिला है। मैं गढ़चिरौली जिले से हूँ। तुम में से कुछ लोगों ने सुना होगा, आप में से कुछ लोगों ने अगर सुना है, वो माओइस्टों के लिए ही ऐसा लगता है जैसे हर घर में माओइस्ट है। मैं भी माओइस्ट अंदर से कुछ लोगों ने कहना शुरू किया था, ये भी माओइस्ट है अलग अलग प्रकार से। इतने भी गांव में नहीं आते, पिछले 6-7 सालों में माओइस्ट हमारे गांव में दिखे नहीं, बचपन में रेगुलरली आया करते थे। तो बस्तर जो है, नारायणपुर, बस्तर, दंतेवाड़ा, गढ़चिरौली, चंद्रपुर का कुछ हिस्सा, उधर आदिलाबाद तेलंगाना वाला, ये सारा जो एरिया है, तो वो माओइस्ट एरिया है। तो वहां के कलेक्टर थे शर्मा, बीडी शर्मा साहब। ही लेफ्ट द जॉब, आईएएस थे वो, एंड ही कमिटेड हिज लाइफ टू द स्टडीज ऑफ माडिया कम्युनिटी। तो मतलब इतना बड़ा कमिटमेंट अगर हम ना भी करें, तो खाना इतना कमिटमेंट करना होगा, तभी जाकर के हम मिलेंगे। सर ने जैसे कहा कि उनमें अगर मिलना है तो अच्छा। दूसरी बात, ऐसा भी नहीं लेना है कि हमको वो ईश्वर ही साक्षात है, ऐसा भी नहीं है। देयर आर प्रॉब्लम्स इन ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज। दारू की समस्या है, दिन भर पीकर घूमने वाले लोग हैं, और ये बड़ी वाली अभी तो ये जो मोबाइल की समस्या आ गई है, कुछ बच्चे कुछ काम ही नहीं करना चाहते हैं। एक जनरल ये भी है कि ऐसा है कि ऐसा नहीं कि उनको जैसे वो जो सर ने कहा था, मैम ने शायद कहा था कि वो पार्क बनकर रहना चाहते नहीं। देखिए, सोसाइटी एवोल्यूशन के प्रोसेस में है। मैं गांव में था तो मैं हाफ पैंट फटा हुआ पैंट पहनता था, आज नहीं पहनता हूँ, अच्छे कपड़े पहनता हूँ। अब और थोड़ा सा मैं सीनियर हो जाऊंगा तो अभी मैं ऑटो से घूमता हूँ, मैं खुद की गाड़ी खरीदूंगा। इस प्रकार के एक कदम आगे बढ़ने की ये जो प्रेरणा होती है प्रत्येक व्यक्ति में होती है। ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी के लोग गांव में बस करके वहां पर वही जीवन जीने की उनकी तमन्ना नहीं है। नई पीढ़ी है वो क्यों फिर वो फॉरेस्ट गार्ड की नौकरियों के लिए जा रहे हैं, पुलिस की नौकरियों के लिए जा रहे हैं, क्योंकि खेती में काम नहीं कर सकते और करने के बाद उतना पैसा नहीं मिलता, उनको पता है। इन वास्तविकताओं को समझना पड़ेगा हमको। लेकिन सिर्फ अब वो वहां से कुछ लोग बाहर निकले, कुछ लोग तो अभी भी दारू पी रहे हैं, उनके कारण उनकी प्रजनन क्षमता कम हो रही है। उसका फायदा क्या हो रहा है कि जो बाहर के लोग आकर के वहां पर उनकी स्त्रियों के साथ विवाह चल रहा है, जिसके कारण वो लैंड ग्रैबिंग हो रही है। अब होता क्या है कि इफ आई मैरी, मैंने कहा कि कल्चरली आई एम ट्राइबल बट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली आई एम नॉट अ ट्राइबल। इफ आई मैरी अ ट्राइबल वुमन, और उसके नाम पे फिर मैं क्या करूंगा, वो जो जमीन है ट्राइबल जमीन, क्योंकि ट्राइबल की जमीन सिर्फ ट्राइबल ही आदमी खरीद सकता है, लेकिन वो ट्राइबल जमीन मैं खरीद लूंगा और उस प्रकार से कब्जा बनाऊंगा। और कुछ कम्युनिटीज में तो 2-3 शादी अलाउड है वैसे भी, तो वो एक शादी कर लो और दूसरी शादी, दूसरी तीसरी शादी इस प्रकार की लड़कियों के साथ करो। या कोई दारू पी के मर ही गया है इधर उधर, तो वो बेवा है लड़की, तो उसको फंसा लो और उसको शादी कर लो और बाकी कर लो। उसको फिर सरपंच बना दो ग्राम पंचायत का, वो तो नाम की सरपंच वहां पे रहती है, बाकी चलाना तो मुझे ही है यहाँ पे सिस्टम। ये समस्याएं हैं क्योंकि मैं रहता हूं वहां पर। आई डू नॉट अंडरस्टैंड ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज थ्रू बुक्स, आई अंडरस्टैंड देम बाय लिविंग विद इन देम। ये समस्याएं है। ये मैं तो सेंट्रल इंडिया की बात कर रहा हूँ, मतलब आई डोंट नो एनीथिंग एट ऑल अबाउट द नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न स्टेट्स।
We'll
पर ये
take the last
समस्याएं
question.
हैं।
Yeah, we have one more question. Yeah, that's the last question.
अच्छा, आप आवाज,
हाँ,
अच्छा।
Yeah, thank you to all. This was a really wonderful discussion, and we touched upon a lot of things, like food, culture, music, and all those things. But I have a comment and a follow-up question also. But I think we missed one over issue, which has been going on since history, and which is the main issue of tribal community. And if we do not touch upon it, because I don't think anybody has the answer for it, and that is religious conversion. Because now, when we are talking about reclaiming histories, why did all those things happen? By who are Britishers? We are just talking about the external things, but the religious attack that happened, it was a deeply philosophical thing. It was an attack on the way of life, the way you make sense about the world, and that has been happening not only in India; it has happened in Africa
outside also. Yeah.
and lot of places. And it is not also only about history. Presently in Northeast, if we look at the Manipur, the main issue is about the religious conversion and all the tribalism or the group fights that we are looking at. It is also happening because of the religious conversion, and the fundamental way of looking at the world and the fundamental way of making sense of your own being in a tribal community has been lost. And this is also not a local issue, like it is an issue of Northeast or it is an issue of Central India also. There are global power systems who are at play at this. And we at present do not have any idea how do we solve this at our policy level, at our social level, at our cultural level. We do not have any idea. So if in the discourse level also we are not able to address this, if you are not able to freely talk about this religious conversion, then I don't think talking about some history uprisings would really help.
This is very important question, and I congratulate you for having dared to ask such a question and raise such an important issue. See, something has happened. That doesn't mean we should stop now. We should give up, and we should fall prey to the agenda that's being run. There is a huge money, huge power which is working behind. तो उसको हमें उस प्रकार से करना पड़ेगा। और बाकी तो ऐसा कि एट द एंड ऑफ द डे what is important, the intangible cultural heritage, जिसमें हम लाइफ, उनकी भाषा, उनकी वेशभूषा, उनकी पूजा पद्धति, faith is intrinsically connected to their existence. और वही लॉस हुआ तो सब कुछ लॉस हुआ, एवरीथिंग इज लॉस. उसको प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए अपने इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे कोशिश करनी चाहिए. कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, कुछ इंडिविजुअल्स काम कर रहे हैं, उनके साथ अगर हम जुड़े, क्योंकि देखो भारत जैसे जहां पर वी आर अ सेक्युलर कंट्री, वी आर अलाउड टू, मतलब वो तो भाई if
So-
freely, if somebody is doing that, then allowed.
In 1961, the CIA, the American agency, they had a report. Now it is declassified, you can find. It is about Naga Hills, Nagaland. So there I read this. The CIA is saying that because of the rampant, practice of Western civilization, Western culture, especially conversion to Christianity, these young generations has lost its orientation. He is literally an American, and in the CIA they are saying that because of the Christianity, the Naga society is in disarray. They are very confused, and the young generation are, going towards the alcoholism, drug addiction, and a lot of other things. The Western civilization, in other words, he was trying to tell that it has, it is destroying the Naga society. So what the primary answer of your question is, it lies with colonization. The colonialism and the evangelical forces were the two sides of the same coin. The evangelization started once the resistances were suppressed. See, the last battle fought in Naga Hills was the Battle of Konoma in 1878. And the first church established in 1885. The first converts comes in 1885 itself, 2 people. Similarly, Naga in Mizo Hills, the first church established in 1884, and then the first convert it was in 1887, I think. So after so many military operations, dominance, subjugation, so British realized that military may not work in future. This Western civilization, Christianization, in other words, is Westernization. Just Christian way means Western way. Put your, change your dress, language, food habits, everything. Start eating with forks, not with hand, everything. So that is the strategy that colonialists adopted, because the Christians were perceived to be friendly, loyal to the British, and the missionaries were asked to increase the number so that no resistance takes place. Now, after independence, it's become a different, turning into a different cultural identity, tribal identity. Now, recently there was news about forming a Christian country out of various areas. This was not a new concept. It was a concept that was developed in 1930s. It was called Crown Colony, comprising the Christian areas in Naga Hills and also in Burma. These are in public domain. You just read it. Crown Colony. That will, even India gets independence, those areas will be under the crown, the British crown. And therefore, those insurgents, like Fizo and all, in Naga Hills, they were given, citizenship of England. They were having 2 passports. In fact, Fizo became a citizen of England. Then he traveled across the world and propagated whatever. So there was a quite good nexus, deep nexus between the colonization, evangelical forces, and after independence, the separatist groups. You go to Naga Hills, because they lost, as I said, the CIA also said, they lost its orientation. They are uprooted from their civilization roots. So because of that, now they are claiming, the entire insurgency, the mother and father of insurgency in Northeast India is the NNC, or subsequently NSCN, National Socialist Council of Nagaland. They are supplying arms to smaller other groups, like Bodo groups, Kami groups, small groups. I know many of our friends now is surrendered. The leaders, these insurgent groups, they would say, oh, we had training in Nagaland somewhere, these generals. Who supported them? They trained us. Who supplied the arms? They supplied arms. We paid the, bhare dete the. extortion के money इनको दे. So उनका ये है कि they wanted to have a church is very strong. The IBs, others, you go. I think these are not declassified. Some are there. If you read those things, you will find as the churches, those missionaries that comes from foreign countries will know none other than these are CIA and other agents. So church and insurgency and evangelical forces, colonialism, these have a deep connection. That we have to understand. Then only, and also people should realize that, like in 1970s, the Mizos, the Lusais realized that after conversion to Christianity, 90%, more than that, they realized that they have lost their identity. The Nagas also realized when they visited Europe, the Europeans wanted to see their culture. They said, "Oh, we have this, choirs and this gospel songs and all." They said, "We know this. This is our culture. What is your culture? Where is your culture?"
So I think to just pick up, just to pick up from what he said and to your question and to sum up what we have been all discussing. See, it is not about ignoring or not discussing something freely. That is why I said that we want 3 new lenses, right? Astitva, Asmita, and then finally Vikas. It's coming from that perspective only ki we have forgotten our identity. We have compromised our existence. So what kind of development we are looking at is also questionable, right? To sum up today's topic, that is reclaiming history, tribal leaders in the Indian freedom struggle, and the subsequent, points that we have touched, whether you're talking about conversion or we have spoken about image versus reality, all of it is actually coming down to one point. The fact that this Indian society has been divided. We do not know each other anymore. And that has happened because we have been relying on these colonial narratives and perspectives, and we're not making that effort to understand ourselves. It does not matter whether you are from a Janjati community or you're not from a Janjati community. That division has to first go from our mind, right? Because when we are saying that we don't know about Birsa Munda or we don't know about Utirot Singh and all of that, it is not somebody else. It is just a relative or a co-citizen of my country about whom I am ignorant. And so it is not only Janjatiya Asmita Astitva Vikas that is, at stake. It is my Asmita Astitva Vikas and the country's Astitva Asmita Vikas that we are trying to talk about, where we are looking at it holistically. Because it's not single, right? It is not linear. It is multifaceted and everything is connected. So I think this is where I would like to take the permission of the panelists and the House and put an end to today's discussion. But I hope that all of us put together have been able to at least, we have said, start a point of reflection or a curiosity in all of us and see if we can think about reconnecting everything back that we call India today. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Oh, yeah, very bad. Yeah, we'll go down.
So on behalf of the Bhagavan Birsa Munda ITL,